The drive into Raven's Hollow always felt like traveling back in time. The cracked roads, the weathered signs, and the fields that once brimmed with corn now stood empty and dry. Eli Carter, now in his late 20s, hadn't returned to this place since he was 12. Life had taken him far away: college, internships, a podcasting career in Los Angeles, but something about that old email from an anonymous source had pulled him back. If you want real horror, not the stuff you dramatize in your show, come back. The church still breathes. St. Augustine's Church. That ancient, crumbling building on the edge of town. People stopped talking about it a long time ago. It was officially condemned 2 decades earlier, but even before that it was avoided. Whispers of missing children, strange rituals, and the disappearance of Father Mallory made it more than just abandoned. It became a wound the town refused to examine. Eli parked his rental car near the diner, the only one still open on Main Street. As he stepped out, he felt the weight of the silence. The air carried a strange stillness, as if the town had been holding its breath since he left. Familiar buildings stood like ghosts of his childhood. Peeling paint, rusting swings, the grocery store with its faded, open sign still flickering. Inside the diner, a bell jingled overhead. A few heads turned. One of the waitresses squinted, then widened her eyes in recognition. Eli? Eli Carter. He forced a smile. "Hey, Miss Janet. Well, I'll be. You look just like your father. Haven't seen you since. Well, since before it all happened." Her voice faltered slightly. Eli nodded. "Yeah, it's been a while." Over a lukewarm cup of coffee, he asked the only question he really came here to ask. "Do you remember what happened at the church?" Janet froze for a moment. Her eyes darted around the room. The other patrons had gone quiet. Someone cleared their throat. She leaned in slightly and whispered, "People here don't talk about that place. Best to leave it alone." But Eli wasn't here to leave anything alone. That night, he checked into a cheap roadside motel, set up his recording equipment, and began his journal. "This is Eli Carter, and I'm back in Raven's Hollow. 20 years ago, something happened here. Something I've buried deep inside me. I think it's time I found out what that was. I'm starting at the source. The church. St. Augustine's. Tomorrow I'm going back in." He didn't sleep well. His dreams were filled with chanting, the smell of burnt candles, and a child's voice calling his name. The next morning was gray and heavy. Fog blanketed the woods beyond the town as Eli followed the winding dirt path leading to the abandoned church. As he walked, memories began to surface. Faint images of him and his childhood friend Tommy, playing near the church, daring each other to sneak into the sanctuary. Tommy. That was the name he hadn't spoken in years. The friend who disappeared. By the time he reached the clearing, the full silhouette of St. Augustine's Church loomed before him. Tall, skeletal, with stained glass windows broken like jagged teeth and a bell tower leaning to one side. Vines clung to its wooden frame, and the heavy oak doors were shut, though time had warped and cracked them open in places. Eli stood before it in silence, recorder in hand. "St. Augustine's," he said aloud. "You still stand." As he stepped inside, the wooden floor groaned beneath his feet. The scent of mold and rot hit him immediately. Shafts of light poured through the broken windows, illuminating clouds of dust. Pews lay scattered, some overturned. The altar, though cracked and worn, still bore the faint shape of a cross. And in that moment, standing inside the church he once ran screaming from as a child, Eli felt something stir. Not a breeze, not a sound, but a presence. Like the building had been waiting for him. The air inside St. Augustine's Church was thick, stale, and strangely heavy, like time itself had frozen and was now pressing down on Eli's shoulders. He moved carefully between the pews, his footsteps echoing sharply across the old wooden floor. Though the morning sun outside was bright, very little light made it past the stained and broken windows. Shadows clung to the corners like cobwebs. Eli raised his recorder. "It's eerily quiet in here. The walls are warped with water damage, but the structure, it's holding. You'd think after 2 decades of abandonment, this place would have collapsed by now." As he approached the altar, something caught his eye. A faint glimmer of metal beneath one of the fallen pews. He knelt and pulled it out, an old collection plate, now rusted and caked with dried dirt, or was it something else? Blood? He pushed the thought away. To the left of the altar stood a door, partially ajar, leading to what used to be the priest's quarters. He nudged it open with his foot, revealing a small, cluttered room filled with dust-covered books, broken candles, and a toppled crucifix. The walls were covered in old pages, nailed or pinned like some frantic collage. He stepped closer, brushing aside a cobweb, and examined them. Church logs, sermon notes, and burnt scraps of what looks like a diary. He squinted. Wait, this photo, pinned near the top of the wall, was a black and white photograph. A group of children standing outside the church. One of them was Eli. Another was Tommy. And there, in the center, was a little girl in a white dress, but her face had been scratched out with deep, angry gouges. A sudden noise stopped him cold. A whisper. Faint. Almost inaudible. But definitely there. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. He turned quickly, heart racing. Hello? He called out, the word falling flat in the heavy air. He froze, listening. Again, whispers. Not words he could make out, but the rhythm of speech like a chant. Coming from within the walls, or maybe beneath them. He instinctively pressed record on his device and held it up. This is Eli Carter. I'm inside St. Augustine's, and I'm picking up strange noises, whispers. I'm not alone in here. He crept back into the main sanctuary, scanning every inch. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now. The silence had changed. It was no longer just absence of sound. It was intentional, like the building was waiting to respond. Then his flashlight flickered. Just once. He tapped it. Nothing. And then again, this time for longer. The light dimmed, and in that brief second, he swore he saw a shadow move across the altar. Not a trick of the light. A figure. He raised his voice. Who's there? This is private property. I'll call the police. No response. He backed toward the entrance, hands shaking slightly, and reached for the door. But the moment he touched it, the hinges creaked and the door, which had been open when he arrived, now felt unnaturally heavy. It resisted. He yanked harder, finally prying it open. As soon as he stepped out into the sunlight, his breath returned. The weight lifted. The whispers faded. Eli stood there for a long moment, heart thudding in his chest. What was that? He pulled out his phone and checked the recording. He played back the last few seconds he had captured inside. Static, then faint whispers, and then clear as day a voice. A girl's voice. Don't leave me here. His fingers went numb. Back at the motel, he replayed it over and over. There was no mistaking it. It was a real voice. Recorded. Captured on digital audio. And though it had been nearly 20 years since he'd last heard her, that voice sounded exactly like the girl in the scratched-out photo. And he had no idea who she was or why she was asking for help. But now he knew one thing for sure. The church wasn't just haunted. It was calling out to him. The next morning, Eli sat at the corner table of the diner, laptop open, coffee cooling beside him. The voice on the recording played again in his earbuds. Don't leave me here. Every time he heard it, chills crawled down his spine. The voice didn't just sound human, it sounded trapped, filled with sorrow and a strange desperation. He had to dig deeper. He searched online archives, local forums, even a few paranormal blogs. Not much turned up about the church, but Father Malcolm Mallory, the last priest to serve St. Augustine's, had just enough of a trail to follow. Buried in an old newspaper scan, Eli found a headline dated March 12, 1996. Local priest missing after disappearance of 2 children. The article described how Father Mallory vanished shortly after Tommy Hadley and another child. A girl named Emily Rhodes were reported missing. The article noted that police searched the church, but no evidence linked Mallory to the children's disappearance. No bodies were found. No charges were ever filed. Still, the town never forgot. I remember him, said Miss Janet later that afternoon when Eli returned to the diner. Father Mallory. He had something about him. Always calm. Too calm, maybe. Folks said he could make you feel guilty just by looking at you. Did people suspect him? Eli asked. Janet hesitated, wiping down the counter. Some did, but there were others who, well, they worshipped him in a way. Said he could heal with just a prayer. That he knew things about people he shouldn't have known. Eli raised an eyebrow. Like a psychic? More like a man who listened too close to the wrong voice, she said quietly. Some said he found something in that church. something buried deep. And after that he changed. That night, Eli returned to the church not to explore, but to break into the lower chambers. He remembered vaguely as a child that there was a basement sealed off years ago. He brought tools, flashlights, and extra batteries. Just inside the altar room, behind a fallen cabinet, he found it, a trapdoor, rusted shut. It took 20 minutes to pry it open. The stairwell descended into complete blackness. Mold bloomed along the walls, and the air was cool, damp, and suffocating. He descended slowly. The basement was lined with stone walls much older than the church above. It looked more like a crypt than anything else. Shelves of decaying books, stacks of candles, and symbols etched into the walls with some kind of red chalk or blood. In the center was a single chair, and beside it a cassette recorder. Eli picked it up carefully and noticed a small marking on the bottom, Mallory, Final Confession. He didn't hesitate. Back at the motel, he played the tape. The audio crackled for a moment, then a man's voice, measured, soft, almost hypnotic. If you were hearing this, then I have failed. I thought I could contain it. I thought prayer was enough. But the girl, Emily, she wasn't meant to enter that room. She opened it. The door beneath the altar. She heard the voices first. Eli leaned forward, every muscle tensed. I thought I could save her. But she disappeared into the walls. I hear her still sometimes. We all do. The others in town, they pretend not to, but they hear her too. The voice paused. A long breath. The church is older than this town. Older than God, maybe. Built on something that shouldn't have been disturbed. I disturbed it. The recording ended abruptly. Eli sat in silence, heart pounding. So it was true. There had been rituals. Secrets. And Emily Rhodes, the girl in the photograph, had vanished inside the church. Into its walls, according to Mallory. Could that really happen? He replayed the whispered voice from his own recording. The girl's plea. Don't leave me here. Everything was pointing to the same horrifying truth. She was still there. Not just as a ghost, but somehow alive in another state. Trapped. Buried beneath layers of time, space, or something darker. And Father Mallory? He hadn't run away. He had vanished because something had taken him too. The next morning, Eli returned to St. Augustine's with one goal. Find the room Father Mallory had referenced in the tape. The room beneath the altar, where Emily had last been seen. The church was eerily still as he entered. The faint smell of mildew and old wood greeted him, along with a lingering sense of unease. But now, armed with the truth and driven by the voice on the recorder, Eli pushed past fear. He moved toward the altar, brushing aside the fallen remnants of candle stands and torn hymn books. He crouched, examining the floor beneath the main altar slab. The surface was cracked in the center, the concrete brittle. With the edge of a crowbar, he chipped away at the seam and pried loose a heavy square tile. Beneath it was a hollow space about the size of a crawl hole leading into darkness. A rush of cold air met him. He lowered a flashlight in. The beam revealed a stone staircase, narrow and twisting downward into what looked like a sealed chamber. Eli took a breath, slung his backpack on, and climbed down. The walls were different here, older, almost prehistoric. The stones were massive and uneven, carved with strange symbols he didn't recognize. The air was damp and thick with something that felt unnatural. When he reached the bottom, he found a narrow hallway, the floor lined with bones, small animal skulls, perhaps. Or not. The passage led to a heavy wooden door, reinforced with rusted iron bands. It was shut tight, but the wood had weakened with time. With effort, he pushed it open. Inside was a room completely unlike the rest of the church. It was circular, the walls lined with shelves holding dozens of jars filled with cloudy liquid. Inside the jars were things. Preserved animal fetuses. Disfigured dolls. Something that looked like a bird but with human teeth. In the center of the room was a stone slab covered in what Eli first mistook for dried moss. But when he touched it, he realized it was something else: hair. Long strands, tangled and clumped. Above the slab hung a wooden crucifix, but it was upside down, its arms carved with symbols that matched those in the hallway. Someone had burned words into the stone below it. Do not unseal. Eli turned as something shifted behind him. A sound like stone grinding against stone. He flashed the light back toward the door. It was closing on its own. He lunged, managing to jam his crowbar into the frame just in time. The door stopped, groaning against the metal. He panted, heart pounding. Whatever force was here didn't want him inside. But he was already in. He turned again, scanning the room. His eyes landed on a small chest tucked in a shadowed corner. He pulled it out. The lock had long since rusted away. Inside were scraps of paper, a tarnished rosary, and a diary. Its leather cover warped by age and dampness. He opened it carefully. The first few pages were filled with Latin prayers, but further in, the handwriting changed. Shaky, desperate. Emily hears them. I hear them too. They speak in dreams, in mirrors, in shadows. I thought I was saving her. I thought we could bring her back. But the moment she stepped into the circle, she was gone. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just vanished, as though the church swallowed her. I've sealed the room, locked the doors. I burned the symbols into the stone. It won't be enough. The last page was dated the night Father Mallory vanished. They're calling again. Not just her. Others. I can't hold them back anymore. Eli closed the book slowly. So it was true. Father Mallory hadn't harmed Emily. He had tried to save her. But in doing so, he had awakened something older than either of them understood. A presence. A force bound to the church and to the room beneath it. The whispering began again. Soft. All around him. Eli turned slowly. This time it was not a voice. It was a chorus. Not only Emily but others. Male, female, children, adults. Voices layered over each other like 1,000 dying breaths. Help us. Let us out. Don't look away. Eli grabbed the diary, backed toward the door, yanked the crowbar free, and escaped just as the door slammed shut behind him with a thunderous boom. He ran up the stone steps, gasping for air as he burst back into the sanctuary. The church fell silent again. But something had changed. Now he knew what lay beneath St. Augustine's. And he knew that what had been locked there was never supposed to be found. Eli didn't sleep that night. He sat in the motel room, the door bolted, every light on, the ancient diary resting on the table in front of him. But what demanded his attention more than anything was the cassette recorder. He had brought it up from the basement along with the diary and had played Mallory's confession at least a dozen times already. But this time he noticed something strange. At the very end of the tape, just after Mallory's final words, there was a faint sound. Not static, not silence, but a whisper almost buried beneath the hiss of the old tape. He played it again. Then again. Slowed it down, cleaned the audio using basic software on his laptop. Eventually, a series of voices emerged. Whispers. Overlapping. Shifting in tone and pitch. He listened, volume low, heart pounding. Some of the words were impossible to make out. Others sent a chill down his spine. They're watching through the cracks. The key is buried with the child. The door was never meant to open. Then one voice rose above the others, clearer, sharper. Eli, he froze. Rewound the tape. Played it again. Eli, don't leave us. His stomach turned. It knew his name. He was sure that voice hadn't been there before. Was it Emily? Or something else, using her voice? He tried to rationalize, maybe it was just power of suggestion, a trick of the mind, hearing what he feared most. But deep down he knew. The voice was real. And it was new. This wasn't just a recording anymore. Something had changed when he opened that door. The next morning, Eli visited the local historical society. It was a small brick building behind the town library, dusty and barely staffed. An old man named Mr. Callahan, who looked like he hadn't left his desk since 1993, greeted him. I'm researching the church, Eli began cautiously. Specifically Father Mallory and the events of the 90s. Callahan's eyes narrowed. Should have stayed gone, that place. I found a recording. There's a voice on it. A woman. A girl, maybe. Saying names. One of them is mine. Callahan looked at him, genuinely concerned now. You opened the door, didn't you? Eli blinked. What door? The one under the altar, Callahan said flatly. The one that should never have been touched. Eli didn't answer. Callahan stood slowly, walked to a locked cabinet and retrieved a thick file. This is everything we have on St. Augustine's, he said. Most people don't look at it. They don't want to. Inside the file were old blueprints, faded photographs, and pages of handwritten reports. One photograph showed the church in 1904, before renovations. In the foreground, 5 men stood in front of what appeared to be the original altar, now replaced. One of the men was holding a small stone tablet covered in ancient symbols, the same ones Eli saw on the basement walls. The church was built on top of an older structure, Callahan explained. Nobody knows who laid the foundation. Some say it was a pagan site. Others say it was a prison built to contain something. Not someone something. Emily Rhodes, Eli asked, what happened to her? Callahan's gaze dropped. They say she went into the church one evening and never came out. Her mother was sure she heard her voice calling from inside the walls. For weeks. Eli swallowed hard. Was her body ever found? No, Callahan paused. And neither was Father Mallory's. Just his rosary, burned into the stone floor. That night, Eli returned to the motel and played the tape one final time, this time through external speakers. The whispers now layered themselves more aggressively. There were new voices. A man's voice cried out, "It's not just her, run." Another pleaded, "They see through the mirrors." Then a chorus, "It's open. It's open. It's open." The lights flickered. The TV turned on by itself. The radio in the corner, long unplugged, buzzed to life and played soft static. Eli stood frozen and then knocking. 3 knocks. At the door. Slow. Deliberate. He crept to the peephole. No one there. Then another knock. From the closet this time. He turned. The closet door was shut. Eli backed away, hands shaking. "Please," came the whisper again. This time from inside the room. "Don't leave us." Eli now understood. It wasn't just the church that held secrets. The voices had followed him. Eli had intended to leave the town that morning. He packed his bags, loaded up his car, and even sat behind the wheel with the engine running. But something held him there, something stronger than curiosity. It was as if the whispers had tethered him, unwilling to let go until the truth had been fully uncovered. And a single thought wouldn't leave his mind. This wasn't the first time. Not just Emily. Not just Father Mallory. There had to be others. Hidden, forgotten, or erased from memory. So he drove, not out of town, but back to the county archives instead. The building was even more neglected than the historical society. Dust clung to the corners of every file drawer, and the records weren't digitized. He spent hours sifting through old newspapers, death records, missing persons reports. And then he saw it. Pattern. Every 27 years. Like clockwork. Someone went missing in the area surrounding St. Augustine's Church. The names changed. The details varied. But the circumstances were always the same. Vanished without a trace. Last seen near or inside the church. No bodies ever found. Eli wrote them down in a notebook, starting from the oldest report he could find. 1877, Sarah Whitlock, age 12. Last seen bringing food to her father, the groundskeeper of the church. 1904, Elijah Morris, age 31. Historian. Had been documenting the site's pre-Christian symbols before vanishing during a thunderstorm. 1931, Daniel McCall, age 16. Choirboy. Disappeared during midnight mass. 1958, Margaret and Henry Dales, newlyweds. Broke into the church for a spooky honeymoon photo, never came back out. 1985, Emily Rhodes. 2012, Father Peter Mallory. And now it was 2024. 12 years since the last disappearance. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Each cycle seemed to feed something or someone. Eli felt the weight of the diary in his bag and reread its final lines, "I can't hold them back anymore." The thing under the church didn't just hunger for life, it thirsted for souls. In a sudden wave of urgency, he went to the town's sheriff's office. He needed someone, anyone, to believe him. But when he mentioned St. Augustine's, the young deputy at the desk immediately shut down. "Best not dig too deep into that place," he said, eyes hard. "It brings nothing but trouble. You know people have disappeared, right?" Eli demanded. "And some things are better left that way." Frustrated, Eli turned to leave. That's when the older sheriff stepped out of his office, Sheriff Danner, weathered and quiet, but sharp. "You're the guy asking about the church," he said. "Come with me." In his back office, Danner pulled out a manila envelope labeled, "Restricted, St. Augustine." Inside were black and white photos, crime scene notes, and a cassette copy of Father Mallory's recording. "You're not the first to come here looking for answers," Danner said, "but you're the first to make it back from that basement." "You knew?" Eli asked, stunned. Danner nodded slowly. "The town made a decision years ago. We leave the church be. Let sleeping things lie." "But they don't lie still," Eli replied. "They whisper. They follow. They feed." Danner's jaw tightened. "And what would you do, Mr. Eli Hayes? Blow the lid off? Tell the world?" That's what Mallory tried. The next day, the bishop shut him down. Called him mentally unwell. They erased everything. Told us to forget it. Eli was quiet for a moment. "I don't think I have a choice anymore," he said. "They're not letting me go." Danner stared at him, then nodded toward a folder. "Then you'll want to see this." Eli opened it. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, detailing a network of underground tunnels beneath the church. Dated 1869. The tunnels stretched well beyond the church walls, winding through the town like hidden routes. Some led directly beneath homes, stores, even the old cemetery. It's not just the church, Eli murmured. It's the whole town. Danner said nothing. As Eli left the station, a sick feeling crawled over him. The sun had begun to set. The whispers hadn't returned. But silence, he realized, was worse. Because now he knew what they were waiting for. The next soul. The next offering. And the next knock in the dark. The church loomed in the moonlight, silent, still, as if it hadn't been the center of 100 years of whispered horror. Eli stood before it once more. This time there was no camera, no recorder, no notebook. Just the diary. A flashlight. And the resolve that this time he would end it. The front door creaked open without effort. As he stepped into the nave, the familiar smell of mildew, dust, and something far older clung to his nose. The pews sat crooked, the altar still cracked, and the silence was oppressive, thick, as if the building itself were holding its breath. He made his way down the aisle, past the stained glass windows, now dulled with grime. Shadows danced strangely along the walls, flickering in ways that didn't match his flashlight beam. He didn't go for the pulpit. He went for the basement door. The same door that had once hidden Father Mallory's confession. The same door that should have stayed sealed. Descending the steps felt like being swallowed. Each creak beneath his foot sounded louder, deeper, echoing in unnatural ways. The air grew colder. The symbols on the walls pulsed slightly, reacting to his presence, or maybe just his fear. He reached the bottom and turned toward the iron door Mallory had written about. It was open, not wide, just a few inches. Enough to feel the chill that rolled out from within. Enough to smell the damp, metallic stench of rot. Enough to hear, very faintly, weeping. He pushed the door open. Beyond it, a massive cavern stretched out. Natural rock walls gave way to carved stone. A blend of architecture and earth. There were statues, too old to identify. Their faces twisted into silent screams. And in the center of the room was what looked like an altar made of bone. At its base, a girl knelt, facing away from him. Long hair, torn white dress. "Emily?" he asked, barely breathing. She didn't turn, didn't move. "I read the diary," Eli whispered, stepping closer. "I know what they did to you. I know what's trapped here." Still no response. He took another step. "You're not alone anymore." Her head twitched slightly. Then the voice came. Not from her lips, but from everywhere. She never left. It was not Emily's voice. The girl on the floor jerked unnaturally, her limbs bending in ways no human should move. Then she slowly rose to her feet and turned. Her eyes were black, empty, not just void of color, void of soul. A smile spread across her face, cracking the dry skin. "We've been waiting." Eli stumbled back, flashlight shaking in his grip. Shadows around the cavern began to move, crawling down the walls, stretching out from behind pillars. Dozens of figures, humanoid but distorted, bodies gaunt, eyes glowing faintly, mouths sewn shut or hanging open with voiceless screams. The whispers returned. "Stay. Join us. One more, one more." Eli remembered the diary, Mallory's last words. "I can't hold them back anymore. But maybe someone else can." He pulled the diary from his jacket, flipping to the final page. There was something taped to it, a key. Mallory had left it behind. And just beneath it, a short prayer, written in Latin. He read it aloud. The moment the words left his mouth, the cavern began to rumble. The air thickened, pressing down on him like a weight. The creature screamed, not in sound, but in vibration, making his bones ache. Emily, or whatever she had become, charged at him. Eli didn't move. He finished the prayer. The key in his hand glowed red, burning his palm. He dropped it and it clattered to the floor, spinning once, and then the altar erupted in a flash of light. A blinding, searing white filled the cavern. The whispers turned to shrieks. The shadows thrashed. Eli felt himself being pulled backward as though the room itself was rejecting him. He clung to the threshold of the iron door, his grip slipping. Then silence. He opened his eyes. He was lying on the basement floor. The iron door was sealed shut once more. The symbols on the walls had faded to gray. And the whispers were gone. For the first time since he'd arrived in town, the air felt clean. Still. Empty in a way that felt safe. He climbed the stairs, emerging into the main church. It was quiet again. Just a ruined building. No spirits. No shadows. No eyes watching from the dark. He stepped outside into the cool night and took a deep breath. It was over. Or at least it seemed to be. Eli never intended to stay in the town longer than a week. He had come for a simple story. A historical piece about an old, forgotten church. He never expected to uncover a pattern of disappearances nor descend into the bowels of a nightmare that existed beneath the ground. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to leave. Not yet. He sat at the cafe on Main Street, sipping black coffee as the early morning sun crept over the hills. The townspeople, once cautious and distant, now greeted him with quiet nods. Some even offered small smiles. It was as if a fog had lifted, not just from the church, but from the entire community. And yet, no one spoke about what had happened. Not openly. Sheriff Danner had visited him the day after the final descent, dropping off a manila envelope, this one filled with old photos of the church, maps of the underground caverns, and a signed note, "For when they ask." Because they will. Eli had asked him one last time, "Do you think it's really gone?" Danner just stared at him for a moment, then said, "Things like that, they don't disappear. But they can be quieted. Put to sleep." Eli understood. He didn't destroy whatever lived under St. Augustine's. He'd sealed it again. But for how long? Days passed. Then weeks. He wrote his article, but not for publication. It was too unbelievable, too dark, and too dangerous to put in any magazine or website. He printed it, bound it, and left a copy with the sheriff. Another he stored in a safe in his apartment, labeled plainly, "Do not open." He thought often about Emily Rhodes. About the thing that had worn her face. And most of all, about the whispers. They had stopped. For now. But there were signs, small things, that hinted at something still watching. Children would sometimes stop and stare at the church ruins for too long. Pets barked and refused to go near it. At night, birds no longer perched on the steeple. And then one day, Eli noticed something carved into his apartment door. It was faint, like scratched with a nail. A symbol. The same one etched into the basement walls. He stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing its curve. Was it a warning? A mark? Or just a memory that refused to die? Eli began recording his thoughts every night, just in case. He didn't feel possessed or haunted, but he knew now how subtly it began. He remembered Father Mallory's voice on the tape and how he had said, "They know your name now. And once they know your name, they wait for your voice." It wasn't just about fighting monsters in the dark. It was about silence. About letting them be forgotten. Because names have power. And places, especially those soaked in old blood, don't just rot, they remember. A month after the sealing, Eli returned to the church one final time. He didn't go inside. He didn't need to. He stood at the fence, looking at the broken windows and crumbling bricks. The vines had begun to reclaim it, slowly swallowing its ugliness. Nature was doing what humanity could not. As he turned to leave, he noticed something in the dirt. A feather. Black. Charred at the tip. He didn't pick it up. Some things are meant to be left untouched. That night, he dreamt of the cavern. Of the altar. Of Emily standing at the far end, back to him once more. But this time she turned slowly. Her face was calm. Unmarked. She looked at him, not with malice, but with deep, endless sadness. And she whispered only one word, "Soon." Eli woke up in a cold sweat. The air was silent. No knocks. No voices. But in the corner of the room where the moonlight didn't reach, the shadows seemed just a bit too dark. And somewhere far below the surface, something ancient and patient began to stir again. 20.